welcome to the Løve Tennis Podcast. This is episode 2. I'm really excited about this, and I am going to just say up front, like this podcast is raw, it's real. It's like I'm not in a high quality studio. My kids might be screaming outside the door. You're going to get everything here. So but I'm excited to welcome actually, I don't even know how to say your last name. Is it just Bruse?
Yeah, it's just Bruse.
All right, McKay Bruse, welcome.
Thank you.
I'll turn it to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. My name's McKay. I just graduated actually last week from BYU with my degree in statistics, and then I got a minor in business. That's kind of the route I want to take my career. I did grow up playing tennis a lot. I played in academy, and I actually was team captain my senior year at Davis High School up in Farmington or Kaysville, Utah. My junior year, actually, we played in state, and we did take state as a doubles team. And so I love tennis. I love playing it every opportunity I get. And so working with Tim over the past couple months has been a real pleasure and really good opportunity.
Awesome. Congrats on graduating.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's exciting.
Super exciting.
Big day there, and
yeah,
off to the real world, huh?
Right.
So yeah, we got connected. McKay and I got connected before the last semester, and just through your professor. We connected on LinkedIn. He was looking for real world projects for, was it a sports analytics class? Is that what the class was?
Yeah, like it's called data science in sports, but yeah, it's pretty much sports analytics.
Okay. Yeah, so it was great, and I'm one you all will hear as I get into future episodes of like I love the numbers, I love the data, I love analytics, and I think it's important. And so I got connected with Zach, and he then connected me with McKay, and we got to work on some numbers for the high school season, and we took a look at real matches from my girls team this fall. We looked at over 1,000 points and pulled some great insights from it. And so that's what we're gonna talk about today. But before we jump into all of that, let's just keep it general. And in your opinion, why is it important for tennis coaches and even players to pay attention to the data and the analytics behind what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, once you look at a professional level in sports, we're seeing more and more sports. They're moving more towards analytics. You get sabermetrics and sports like baseball and football, where it's becoming so important for people to look at the data, and it predicts. The main reason that we use analytics is to predict an outcome, right? We want to predict what can we change, or what can we notice a pattern in our data to improve ourselves or to make our play better. At the professional level in tennis, you see, if you go watch a tennis match, US Open, you're going to see tons of analytics almost every break in game, or points even. They'll say on serves or anything regarding the point. They have all this data that we use. And I think at a high school level, it's not used as much, and the data is still super important, but it might be harder to gather due to a lot of things. Maybe it's time is one big thing, or like we don't have we don't have the materials that like the pros have to be able to do that, if that makes sense. But it is still just as important it is at the professional level. But yeah, we have less access to it in the high school level, probably.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like you're saying, the resources are lacking a little bit. Sometimes it's a lack of video equipment or a lack of knowledge, or then the big one is just a lack of time.
Right.
A lot of us are volunteer high school coaches that have a day job, whether it's as a teacher or elsewhere, and we don't necessarily have the time to go through all the matches and comb through it and then break down the data. And I've tried to do a little bit, but this was great for me to be able to say, hey, McKay, let's take a look at this together, and have you do the heavy lifting, especially since you just know data a whole lot more than I do. So so let's jump into it. We took a look at a few different metrics of things that we could find that influence point outcomes, right? Like you were saying, that's the goal, right? Like we want to find what is going to influence the outcome of a point. We're going to discuss 3 of those things today and what they mean for coaches and how we run practices, and players for, maybe you're practicing on your own. But we're just going to kind of take a look at the practical application of these insights, so we can all improve together. So first, let's talk about the most important shot in the game. That's the serve. Every point starts with one. And you took a little bit of a look at serve placement. So what did you learn about serve placement and the probability of winning points?
Yeah, really interesting. Here we found that, if I remember correctly, Tamil might have to correct me, but the serve placement we found in high school was the most points won off the serve were actually towards the body. And then after that, I think it was down the line or out wide. I can't.
Down the tee and out wide, but those were pretty close. And then
those are pretty close.
I just haven't pulled up right here, but yeah, the body serve seemed to be the most effective.
Right, which is really interesting. I mean, I grew up, at least when I was playing tennis, like the body serve can be a good serve to catch your opponent off guard. But my coaches always told me, like, you want to always be aiming down the tee or out wide, kind of make your opponent move. And that can be a couple different reasons, as I thought about, like, why we're winning more points down the tee or down towards the body. It can be that for high school players, it may be more difficult, like those shots where you're trying to hit those lines out wide or down the tee are less likely. Like most of your shots are going towards the body, or maybe it's a hard shot towards the body, and that might be one of your best serves, more common or easier to hit. And that makes your opponent still have to adjust, right? If it's coming right at you, you have to move, split step, move one way or another to hit that ball back, if that may make sense. But it was an interesting stat that we found, where towards the body in high school tennis was actually proving to be most effective.
Yeah. It's not like it was, a drastic difference of like,
right. It wasn't huge.
75% of the time compared to 50%, it's,
right.
We're talking smaller percentages, but it was still a significant margin. So what do you think is the practical application there? Like, should players at the high school level be emphasizing the body serve more and hitting more body serves, or should it still be a fairly even spread, but then just capitalize on those moments? What do you think is the practical application there?
Right. I do think it could be an application to maybe teach people to hit more towards the body and see how that works for like the team, or maybe, still, but like you said, like the margin between the other two serves were fairly close. So we don't want to draw away from those other two serves, but maybe a bigger focus on hitting towards the body, whereas it might not be even talked about right now. It could be huge towards winning points or winning more games on the high school level.
Like you said, your coach taught you to go after the tee or the wide serve more often. And yeah, maybe that's on us as coaches to say, no, like pay a little more attention to the body, get a little more even distribution so that you can take advantage of, because like you said a minute ago, it's the player still has to move out of the way.
Right.
It's almost more difficult than just a natural step to the side, at the high school level, I think. So if you can get a decent serve at the body, that can probably be pretty effective.
Right. And another thing with that is your as you look into double faults, like if you're going for those serves down the tee or out wide, I feel like this could be something to look into in the future, where you're missing those ones. A safer serve would be towards the body, where you have more area to hit in the court, rather than if you're aiming out wide on like a second serve or aiming down the tee, there's bigger margin of error for getting a double fault.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a really good point. Obviously you don't want a double fault. You want to get the serve in play, right? Like that's the most important aspect of all of this. But yeah, I think that's a really good point. And you bring up a good point there of like, maybe we need to dive deeper in the future. What are, on top of that of like, the first and second serves, and what are some of those things maybe that we need to look at a little bit more in the future when it comes to serve placement?
I think this is something that I don't think we had a chance to look at the data, but to look more directly at first serves and seeing where those location is, that's something that would be super helpful in the future. Kind of look at first serve percentage and look at where those serves are going and the chances of winning a point based off first serve, and then look at second serve and say, hey, maybe our second serve shots at the body are winning a lot, but maybe first serve isn't, or vice versa. And maybe that's where we're having maybe skewness in data, or maybe our down the tee on first serve is really effective, but on the second serve, it's not. So that would be something important we all know that, getting both serves in is super, or not double faulting is super important in tennis, and getting that first serve in and that first serve percentage leads to winning points more often at any level in tennis. We have statistics that show that, but maybe looking at placement of those different serves could help us understand more why we have that body shot is a higher win percentage.
Yeah, no, I like that. I do also think it's worth pointing out and worth reminding anyone who listens to this that this was specifically like the points that we looked at. Yeah, we got over 1,000 points, but they were all my team and then their opponents, right? Like, and there are millions and millions of points played across high school tennis every year. So it might be very different for another team. And we also only looked at singles. So, this could vary into the doubles world. It could be totally different where maybe the wide serve is more effective in doubles for whatever reason. And, so just a reminder to everybody, this was looking at high school girls singles for Maeser Prep and the teams that we played against. So, but I think there are insights there and it's worth exploring. And at least, if there's coaches out there listening to this, at least looking at it for your own team and something to consider and something, like you said, something to try to just see if it's going to be effective. So the second most important shot in the game of tennis, the serve return, assuming that the serve goes in, every shot the next thing is going to be a return, right? We didn't get as much data when it came to the placement of return of serve, but we did get a few hundred points that we looked at. So what are some of the insights that you gained from looking at the location of serve returns?
It was really interesting because when you were gathering this data, you tracked every shot that there was on the return. You had inside out backhand, inside out forehand, down the line, cross court, looking at all the different return shots that are available, which there are a lot, as we know. And some of them we couldn't really make huge takeaways because we'd have what if all 3 points were won hitting a certain shot? There was only 4 points that we gathered doing that. And so there's 100% win rate for that shot, but there's only 4 points. That makes sense. And so in the future, we do need a lot more data to kind of see which shots I think are the most effective. But the one thing that was interesting here on the backhand was it looked like a lot of mishits on the serve, and a lot of double faults were resulting in, I think, a little over 400 to 500 points had no return of the 1,000 that we gathered. And that can be because it's at a high school level. But I did see that one of the shots that looked like it was most effective was the cross court just return back to that had a higher percentage compared to the others.
Yeah, and I think some of that might be it's the safer shot. It's the higher percentage shot. You're going to get fewer errors if you're going cross court versus if you're trying to get real aggressive off of a serve, which if you're playing a good server, that's really difficult to do to redirect and take a ball down the line. But I think that's great insight. When you're as a player, if you jump into a match and you're playing a strong server, you probably want to play it a little safer and take more balls cross court because you're gonna give yourself a lot more errors if you start trying to take the ball down the line and get a little too aggressive too early, against a strong server. And then you kind of alluded to the absurd number of points that didn't even include a return. I went to the spreadsheet and I did a little quick math there. It was 21% of points had no return. That's almost a quarter of the time the ball doesn't even come back and play. And some of that's going to be double faults. And there's a pretty solid number that were double faults. But a lot of that is just, a service winner because, they made contact, but they didn't get the ball back.
Hmm.
And they weren't able to get the ball in play. So what does that mean then for high school tennis players if almost a quarter of the time the ball isn't being returned? What should these high school players and coaches take away from that?
Right. I think it might be obvious, but the biggest thing is like no matter what, at any cost, get your second serve in, right? Because if you don't, you have a 0% chance, which might seem obvious. You're
Yeah.
not going to win the point if you don't get it in, but you have definitely greater than 0% chance if you do get it in. And even that stat where almost a quarter of the returns aren't even coming back at a high school level, there's a 1 in 4 chance that opponent's going to miss it altogether. You know what I mean? Or you hit a good return ace or whatever it can be. But I think that kind of just emphasizes how in high school, at least, like just at any point, like whatever you have to do to get that second serve in, it is so important to make sure you're not double faulting. And I mean, yeah, that would just help the game and help those players immensely.
Yeah. I think it's just huge getting the ball in play, right? And
Yeah.
that's something that we see um, as we were really diving into the data and looking at like rally length and looking at shot by shot. Uh, that became very apparent that, and it is an obvious thing when you like actually take a step back and think about it. But when you're trying to like go full steam, sometimes
Yeah.
you're like, no, I got to hit the winner,
Yeah.
but as we looked at the numbers, it was like very clear of like, just get the ball and play, everybody,
Yeah.
and we saw it as we kind of, you made this little slider as we looked at rally length, and it's obvious, but it goes every other one, right? Like where it's a huge jump, and it's whoever gets the ball in last wins the point. Like it's so simple, and it's so easily forgotten in tennis. Of
Right.
like, it doesn't matter how you get it there, it matters that you get it there.
Yeah.
And once you get it there, then you can start to worry about how. But the most important thing is getting the ball in. Um, and I mean, just speaking of all of that, like the most important or the most interesting thing, I shouldn't say most important, but the most interesting thing in all of the data that we gathered and the insights that you put together, the thing I found most interesting was rally length, and the influence of that. And I'll probably talk about it in a future episode of this podcast of rally length and kind of how that. I mean, that was really what kind of got me started on the analytics train in
Right.
general. Um, but what did you learn about the length of rallies and how that influences the server's chance of winning a point?
Yeah. It was actually really interesting to take a look at that data of how the length of the rally did impact a point in a game. And so one thing I think I remember that was pretty huge was when they kept the rally less than 3 shots, they were winning the point. I think it was like over 60% of the time. You might have to go look at that again, Tim. And when it like switched to, it was over 3 shots, it almost like flopped. Like it was about almost 50-50 about that. And once we get higher, the more shots, it seems like there becomes less of an advantage. I think around 8 shots. Um, Once it gets to be more than that, it's almost 50-50 winning the point. But when you kept it kind of below that point, it became more advantageous towards the server, especially if you keep it the shorter it can, or the shorter you can keep the rally below 8 points, the bigger advantage it was to the server.
Yeah, no, and I think that's such a forgotten thing. And I'll talk about this now. I'll probably talk about it again and again on this podcast. But uh, it was Craig O'Shaughnessy. He's kind of the leader in tennis analytics right now.
Right.
And he, one of his big things is that it's something around 70 to 75% of points end within the first 4 shots of that point. One of the things that, after I learned that statistics, one of the things that I started doing with my players in practices is we would practice 4-shot rallies. Like we would have our players step up and they would play out a point, but only the first 4 shots. If it went longer than that, we called it the returner's point. if so, you step up, you serve the ball, it goes serve for 1, return, and then serve plus 1, return plus 1. If it goes any longer than that, then the return, we gave the return of the point. And our goal with that was, and your data backs that up, right?
Yeah,
That
it
we
does.
want shorter points. And so our goal with that was to get the return, or the server, to master their first 2 shots, the serve and the serve plus 1. If they could master those 2 shots, and use their serve to set themselves up for a good serve plus 1, get to their best shot, they were going to win a lot more points. Whereas the returner's goal is to get the ball in play long enough that they can neutralize the point and hopefully then take control of the point and win it, right? And so I loved seeing the data that you pulled, and seeing how that correlated to Craig O'Shaughnessy's insights and what we've been doing in practices, and like, hey, yay, this is effective apparently. But then I thought it was really interesting as we kind of get later, and you mentioned that 8-shot rally that we looked at, and how it legitimately became a 50-50 ball at that point. If it was shorter than 8 shots or greater than 8 shots, you had the same chances of winning. Kind of seems to be a tipping point. And then obviously, like, there's little tipping points earlier, like you mentioned that 3-shot rally, but are there other things that we can learn from that? Rather than, are there things that a player should know going on court as a rally gets longer or shorter, or what should they be doing? What should be going on in their minds?
Yeah, I mean, we do know, like, if you played tennis before and any sort of competitive level, it is such a mental game. It can be so mental. Like, I remember, like, especially when you hit like a big first serve, and this is one thing maybe to be cautious of, is we're talking about like keeping those points short. Like, you want to, if I get a really good serve and I need those next couple of shots, I'm looking to put that point away. You know what I mean? They're barely getting it back. But I remember, like, on my own when I was playing, if you get a big serve in and they return it really good return back, I'm almost like shocked, like almost the pressure's on you now. Like, I was like, oh, how did he get that back? I need to put this point away quickly. Whereas I feel like you need to more recover and still be cautious of those errors that can happen when you're trying to put away points too quickly. I think it's something to be aware of, and not put it away too fast, just looking at the data, you know what I mean? Where we do need to be aware that the data shows, like, if we put these points away faster, we can win. But almost as it becomes, as we said, you can still keep the rally long, you're going to end up winning the point. It doesn't become an advantage to either person. So I think just still getting the ball in is such a key factor to winning these points in rallies.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight there. One thing that I would say, just thinking about it now, if if a player's on court, knows these things now, right? Like, knows that I want to keep the rally. Like, there's no reason to panic, though.
Right.
You kind of alluded to that, right? Like, if the point goes longer, panic isn't going to help you.
Right.
You can't sit there and be like, oh shoot, I didn't end the point quickly.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble now. Like, no, you gotta regroup. Sure, you might have had a game plan for the first couple of points, but make sure you know the good principles of how to construct a point.
Yep.
Because you can still take advantage, and you can still kind of dictate the point, even if the rally goes longer than you were hoping for.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, thank you, McKay. This is great stuff. I appreciate all the work that you did for my team this year, and then jumping on this podcast episode here to share those insights, and hopefully it's something that, not just Maeser Tennis, but high school players everywhere can take advantage of. I think these are great lessons that anyone can use as just kind of a starting point for your own game. Because like we said, it's going to vary from player to player, team to team. But this should be a good starting point, I think, for a lot of high school teams and a lot of high school players to build on.